Live. We are going to start today's class on page 149 on the bottom paragraph. So the last thing we were speaking about was how Hashem is, as we said, that Hashem is there before He created the world, Hashem is there after He created the world. There's no change. It's a very deep concept. We spoke about it at length yesterday. And then we started to explain, we got up to the Mittler Rabbi. Right? We're going through all the Rebbeim from the Baal Shem Tov. And we said that in Shar HaYichud from the Mittler Rabbi, in Perek Tes, he addresses this difficulty. How can he say nothing changed? Right? That he's there before the world, he's there after the world, and it's exactly the same. Because we said that the Tzimtzum only happened as far as we're concerned. But the Mittler Rabbi chimes in on this matter, and we'll take it from 4 lines down from the last paragraph there, where he says, L'chora eino muvan. Yeah? He says, similarly, this is not understood because Masha Kasuv Ani Hashem lo shanisi. There's a pasuk that says, I, Hashem, have not changed. And this is where the concept of Chazal get this from, that Hashem did not change from creating the world. Nothing happened. Which definitely does not look like the case. But here this is where we left off yesterday. He delves into this thing kind of quite deeply. And he says, first of all, what does exactly it mean, Ani Hashem lo shanisi? It refers to Malchus de Ein Sof. Right? Hari Malchusacha Malchus kol lamim. Malchus de Ein Sof, I guess it goes on this Indian of Ani. Right? That when Hashem says I, it's not necessarily referring to the Ein Sof light entirely, but it's referring to Malchus of Ein Sof. What is Malchus of Ein Sof? Where's our Kabbalists over here? What's that? I'm sorry? Eser spheres like Ganuzos. Meaning to say that, remember we talked about the ocean and the drop of water inside the ocean. The drop of water inside the ocean is like the Koach HaGvul, that Hashem has the ability to make finite light. Remember we spoke in the previous class that if we're going to call it the Or Ein Sof, then it must really have everything in there, including it must have light which negates the Metzias of the world, and it also must have light which allows for the Metzias of the world. What's the difference between these two lights? The light which negates the Metzias of the world is what we said, that it's the Or Elyon Pashit Mamaleas Kol Metzias. It's the simple light, uncompound, infinite light that negates all existence. But then there's also the drop in the ocean, which eventually is going to crawl into the world and give them the Metzias. That also must be there. But we said that that's Behelem, right? That's concealed when the infinite ocean is shining. And so there has to be a tzimtzum and then a kav in order to reveal it. But what he's saying is that little drop, which is the potential for finite light, that is actually goes on in what's called Malchus de Ein Sof, right? I think he points out in Ayin Beis, it's because there's something called Malchus de Ein Sof. Doesn't mean there's Chesed Gevurah Tiferes of Ein Sof, right? It's Malchus of Ein Sof is also sometimes referred to as like the Knaf of the Talis. The Talis is this, represents this more makif, that you wrap it around yourself, you cover the Adam, which is the finite light, represents the Or Ein Sof, but the Talis has a little Knaf, which means it has a corner, which is a kind of a weird thing for the Or Ein Sof to have a corner. Right? Corner represents sort of it comes to a point, but that's the idea that in Hashem's infinite Or Ein Sof light, it also exists because it's truly Or Ein Sof, and you can't put any limitations on it. It also must have the source of the finite light. That's what we call the corner of the talis. And then conveniently, what comes off the corner of the talis? 32 strands, which represents the 32 pathways of Chokhmah and all the spheros, etc., all the Or Panimi. But the Or Panimi already has like a little hook that you hang all that Or Panimi on the knaf, right? So this is called Malchus de Ein Sof. And when he says, Ani Avaya lo shanisi, I am Hashem, have not changed, it's not even really talking necessarily about I of the Atzmus of Hashem. It's referring, as the Mittler Rebbe writes, it's referring to Malchus of Ein Sof. What's that? Malchus of Ein Sof. And Malchus of Ein Sof is not so easy. That's even much harder to say that it doesn't change. If you want to tell me like the Hashem's Atzmus, but when you say Ani Hashem lo shanisi, you're talking about the Malchus of Ein Sof. It is kind of an Or Panimi, it's leading towards an Or Panimi concept. And then what do we say? Malchusacha, malchus kol lamim. So inside of that little drop actually exists all the worlds that will ever be. All the finite divisions and everything that it could ever be, right? So we could say Malchusacha, your Malchus, which is the Malchus of Ein Sof, really is Malchus Kol Lamim. It's the Malchus of all the worlds. So therefore, it's referring to the infinite numbers of worlds that are inside of this Ani, Hainu Shemalchusacha, which means that your Malchusacha, your Malchus, quote unquote, which is Kefishi Lifnei HaTzimtzum, which is the Malchus of Ein Sof, your Malchus, which is as it is before the Tzimtzum, He Malchus Kol Lamim Ad Olam Hachitachton. It's not differentiated from the Malchus, so to speak, from the kingdom of all the worlds, all the way down to the lowest worlds. In other words, even this world and all of its finite changes, etc. It's all inside of Malchusacha, because at the end of the day, that is the source of the finite life. Is everyone following what I'm saying? Any questions?
Yeah, I don't understand how that works. How can it not change?
Okay, well that's what we're asking. But the point is that that's what the Rebbe's question is. If you want to tell me the Or Ein Sof, you want to tell me the Atzmus doesn't change, but we're talking about that he's the same before he created the world and after he created the world, and we learned this from the pasuk Ani Hashem Lo Shanisi. Ani refers to Malchus. Malchus is totally caught up with the changing world, and that's his question.
So the Malchus or Ein Sof is not, it's not a Sphira, right? This is pre-Sphiras, this is pre-Atzilus.
Yeah. No, it is, yeah.
But
yeah.
It's kind of the output of Ein Sof, right? It's
yeah.
the point where something else is coming out from. Is that
it's the source of finite light inside of infinite light. Right? So it's like we said, it's like the beginning, the drop inside the ocean. So even though when there's an ocean, there's no drop available to be seen. But if you would, so to speak, remove all the ocean and then bring back that one drop that you sort of set aside, so that would be something finite, where then all finite things are going to draw their life force from that source of all finite things. It is called Atzilus, the Klalus. But it's above what he's talking about Atzilus. Okay. There's the general worlds of four worlds, and there's the more particular four worlds. Not for now. That'll come up in its time. Anyway, so we have a problem. If you're saying the Ani is really this finite light, the source of all the worlds, now not changing doesn't really go so well with that, because im kain kasher yeshino efil b'malchus da'asiyah, because if there's going to be a little change even down here in these worlds that change, over there you want to say it's a drop of water in the ocean, it's bottled, nothing happens, I can understand, but it's associated and connected with everything that's going to be. And therefore, if there's even this most minute change, even in the world of Asiyah, see that? That automatically, po'el shinoi gam b'bechinas malchusacha. That will then make a change in malchuscha. Think about how much power you have, right? Because they're all associated with each other. All the things that are happening here are happening there first. So if you do a little move, it does make a change. Maybe it doesn't make a change in the Or Ein Sof that's above malchus of Ein Sof, or in the Atzmus, but in the light which is dedicated to becoming into the world, then if you make one little move, it is a change.
You're saying that change already existed in the Malchut of Ein Sof? But you moving the cup was already something that...
Is he saying that, or are you saying that?
Isn't that what the Maimar is saying?
Not yet. In other words, we're going to get to the solution, which we spoke about also yesterday, which is kind of you're tapping into. But in the meantime, we're not understanding how there is something called not changing when it is the source of the worlds of change, right? Is there not such a thing as change? If something moves right, left, that's called change. So you say that doesn't affect Hashem. So if you want to tell me it doesn't affect Hashem's atzmus, that which is above the world, fine. But if you're going to tell me it doesn't affect Hashem as He is sort of being the root of the world, on the contrary, everything that happens here is affecting a change there, seemingly. So now we're going to try and understand this. I told you this is the most complicated part of this mimer, but we can do it. I hope so. Umavar. So the Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe explains there, Shaterutz lekol zeh hu inyan hatzimtzum kiyadua. It's usually the answer to every question of your life. The answer to this question is the inyan of the tzimtzum. And what does he mean? The im haya shefa. Underline that word shefa. You're going to see that that's kind of the main word in this sentence. Im haya shefa derech ilav alul. When he says the shefa, he means like this outpouring of light from Malchus of Ein Sof until all the worlds. If that was happening in a way of what we call ilav alu, cause and effect, haya nofil inyan shinavis palus, then yes, if you are looking at it in a certain wrong way, then you cannot negate the idea that a change down below affects a change above. Right? Because ultimately what he means, we're going to see, he's going to detail this, but I'll just explain. The Indian of Shefa, Ilu Va'alu, is the Indian of Shefa, right? As opposed to what we call Or. Who knows what's the difference between Shefa and Or? This is like a kind of a well-tread concept. Anybody?
Or is light. Shefa is like kind of a dropping or a flow in a sense.
Yes. So what's the difference between them? What's one of the fundamental differences between them? Say it again. Okay, that's true. The Or is me'ein ma'or. In other words, the Or has the properties of the luminary. But Shefa, what's that?
It's taken. It disappears from the place in which it's given.
Okay, also good, yes. He's going on a concept here where the idea of the shefa is that when a person's a mashpia, and it's connected with all these things that you just said actually, it means he's literally giving something of himself. This flow that you're talking about, sometimes we're talking about like a shefa of mayim, right? If you have a river and the flow comes down here, the water that was over there is now over here. It like moves itself out of the place. And that's why it's also not me'einama, or it changes. The Indian of Shefa, when it goes, and again also what you said, it has to be received. When it goes into the makabel, it gets encloaked and internalized into the vessels of the makabel, and it becomes changed according to the makabel. And the reason that can even happen is because when it comes out of the mashpia already, it makes a change in the mashpia. In other words, you like really give your all into something, and you lose something when you do that. You know, like it says when Moshe established the Sanhedrin for the first time, Yatzil, right, min haruach, v'yatzil min haruach asher alecha, that he basically put the atzilus light onto these people. It said, what was Moshe compared to at that time? Like a candle, that you can light many other candles from, but doesn't diminish its or. That's the Indian of or. Or, it doesn't get diminished when you share it. Right? And it's because it's me'ina ha'ma'or. It sort of stays associated with the essence, and it never sort of leaves the quality of the essence. But the mashpia, the shefa, it actually comes out and makes a change. So if Hashem, this is what he's trying to say, the answer to our question, why nothing changes, is because if it was a way of shefa, of ilu va'alu, which is exactly what we just described, ilu va'alu means cause and effect, that the cause basically leaves and goes into the effect, and it moves down the pike, and something actually gets transferred from one level to another, like the water from the top of the river to the bottom. There's actually a flow. That's why they call it shefa. If that was the way Hashem created the world, that He like gave something of Himself and moved it down the pike, then there would be a constant of change throughout the whole Seder Ishtalshalus, and there would be a change in God. Something would have happened. Do you guys have the next page? But Hashem did not make the world in such a way. Since the whole Amshacha that comes out of Hashem is just light. In other words, He's like the sun. You know, despite what, like, let's say, I don't know exactly what science says on this Indian, but Chassidus says about the sun, that the light that comes out of the sun does not necessarily affect the sun itself. Right? You can shine the light that comes out of it. It doesn't affect the actual luminary itself. The light is sort of like a natural reaction, like almost like someone's glow, right? That you're walking around and like you see like a holy person, you're like, wow, like there's something coming out of them. There's like a glow coming out of them. They're not losing anything because you see a glow coming out of them, right? It doesn't have to eject from them, in which case they're now lacking something, which would be what we call shefa, right? They just stand where they are, totally unchanged, and there's just sort of like this automatic, right, experience of exiting of light that comes out of them without making any change in themselves. So first of all, this is an important distinction. If the worlds are created in such a way, let's go back to the very source, then they don't necessarily have to change Hashem in any way, because He's not putting Himself into anything. He stays exactly the same. And then go into these brackets, he says, Kefisha Medayak. as the Rebbe is exacting over there, sheyudua hefresh ben or l'shefa. We know the difference between light and shefa, which we just described. And also this is described in a mimer which is entitled, quote, to understand the concept of the Or Ein Sof. That's the name of the mimer, right? That's one of the Alter Rebbe's mimers. That this intention behind using this exact language of Or, where it says that there's the Or Ein Sof. Why do we call this thing that comes out of Hashem the Or specifically? It's lishlol inyan hashefa. We're using the word light. It's the best example we have. Like I said, scientists might say that there's something actually is coming out of the sun and changing the sun, and the sun's dying, etc. We don't really believe those things exactly like that. But the point is that as far as we can see, light comes out of a fire without the fire having to do anything. Like I said, it's just this automatic glow. And since the Kabbalists were trying to figure out a physical entity in this world which best describes this concept, light is, at least to us, the way it appears, is something that works like this. You can light 100 lights from a candle. It doesn't diminish the light, doesn't diminish the candle. So they use this word Or Ein Sof specifically to negate the concept of Shefa, because the Shefa poel shina by mashpia. Because everything else besides light doesn't really work like that. Light is a very unique property even in the physical world. There's not very many things you can emit without them losing anything. So when they called the Or Ein Sof, the Kabbalists, they meant business with that. They were trying to negate the concept that it's something is happening to the mashpia. There's no mashpia here. He's just standing there not giving hashpah to anyone. It's just this glow and rays that come out of him totally unaffects him. So that's one point. The gam hu aydei tzimtzum, and he says, now we're talking about the changes that take place in the lower worlds vis-a-vis this malchus of Ein Sof. So first of all, the whole operation starts off with being light, which means as far as God Himself is concerned, there's no change to talk about. But then he's saying, but even when it comes to the tzimtzum, now this light is there, and you're going to remove the light, so that maybe God didn't change, because now you're only dealing with this sort of like external expression of light, which l'chatchila, the first point he made, we're done with the first point. The first point he made is that the whole conversation is a non-starter, because light to begin with does not have any effect of Hashem, change on Hashem. But then, even now we're going to talk about this light. Maybe there's a change in the light. At least there'd be some kind of a change when it comes to the light. He says, not exactly. Why? Because the whole change that you're going to see, that you go from Malchus to Ein Sof to all of us running around here, moving cups left and right, it's Al Yidei Tzimtzum. That's what he said at the beginning. The answer is Tzimtzum. What does this mean? Vifrat Tzimtzum Arishon, particularly not any old Tzimtzum, but the first Tzimtzum, Shu Ofen Shel Siluk V'Diluk. That the Indian of the first Tzimtzum is that there's a complete removal of this light. Shnistalek Ha'or V'Naiseh Chalom Makampani V'Reik, that the light becomes completely removed, and afterwards, Nimshach Rak Kav Katzar Vadak, and afterwards comes out this little drawing of this little line called the Kav. So he says, No Saf Lakach Shat Tzimtzum Atzma Haya Ba'or Ba'ara Bilvad. Okay, so let's try and understand this line. He says two things here. He wants to say that the fact is nothing really changes in the light, because there's the whole thing that you're seeing, which looks like change, is only a tzimtzum. And what does that mean? Let's try and understand that. It took me a few reads to try and figure out what he's saying here. It's what we said before, that the light, we tend to think of the creation as something happening, right? That there wasn't something there, and now there is something there. But it's the exact opposite, right? Everything was there. Right, and the fact that he basically removes something, he gives the thing that was already there a certain realization that suddenly it's come to be and experience its own self. So if you want to say that the light was going and producing something, then maybe you could say that something happened. But actually what was happening was that everything was already happening. The whole Malchus de Ein Sof, with everything that could ever possibly be in all the worlds, it's already sitting there, down to this, like you were saying in the beginning, down to the most finite movement of every person that's ever going to be throughout the entire timeline. It's already there. What's the big change? It's not called adding, it's called subtracting. Right? He removes everything, so you can't see a thing, And then he brings back this little kav, which means he's showing you now for the first time all the details of reality which were previously covered over. That's not called making something. That's not called making a change. It's called basically uncovering all that was already there. To us, this looks like something took place. So he says this is one point, and that's addition to the fact that this whole thing anyway is only taking place in Or and Ha'ara Bilvad. Despite the fact that even in the light nothing's changed, don't forget that the light itself isn't something that Hashem did. It's like an automatic reality which does not take anything from him. So there's 2 points here that he's trying to make, which they're subtle and complex to a certain degree. One is that the actual light itself, which that might be your first concern, that just to make the light, Hashem already is some kind of something that happened, because that's already something coming out of Hashem. So he starts off by saying, nothing came out of Hashem. Hashem didn't do anything to make this light. It's sort of like, doesn't affect him at all. And secondly, you might think that there's things taking place within this light, and then he comes to explain to you, no, it's just a matter of tzimtzum. What you're seeing is not a product being made. You're seeing a product being uncovered by removing the things that were covering it to begin with. And therefore, we can say there's no change. How do you guys do on that? Any light of day there? No pun intended.
Shadow puppets, is that a good marshal?
Say more.
well, you're creating something. You're like, okay, before there's like nothing, there's just sunlight, and then you're like, oh look, here's a bunny rabbit, but it's actually just because you're removing the light to form.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Except all the bunny rabbits were already there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why you're like,
Yeah. Someone had a question?
So what about the Torah mitzvahs? Wouldn't it actually affect Hashem's act?
No. So Torah mitzvahs is what we're getting to in the next phase of the Tzemach Tzedek, but we spoke about it already, right? When we said shtei chatzatzros, how do you say it? Chatzatzros kesef. What did we say? There was chetzitzura, right? That Hashem is the Aleph and we're the Dam. And really, Hashem made this whole tzimtzum because why? He wanted to have a relationship with us. But before he removed the light, there was no us. So he had to remove the light so that we exist, but then that's so to speak, him coming towards us, making us exist. But then we have to come towards him. How do we do that? Like we learned this morning's class, Havshatas Hagashmias, right? Like taking off layer after layer after layer of the seeming yesh. So that's called Torah mitzvahs. And of course, how you do your Torah mitzvahs, this is where the men get separated from the boys. You think Moshe Rabbeinu puts on tefillin just like you do? Externally it looks like that. But really, he's got this whole other removal of Gashmias going on, and like the corporality of the feeling of self, to the point that he's called Koach Ma, and he has like mama's just like a nothing. So he actually, through the Torah mitzvahs, he reveals the infinite light that was always there. That's what it becomes, a tzura shlema. It becomes a whole tzura of Adam, which is the purpose of everything, and it's what will be in the end of days.
Wouldn't that be a difference in Hashem? The fact that Adam comes together?
Again, it's not a difference in Hashem. It's on the contrary. That's revealing what Hashem had in the first place, which was the Or Ein Sof L'mayla and Lamata Mata. Hashem had those two things at the same time. The only problem is when Hashem had those two things at the same time, we weren't in the picture. Why? Because when the Or Ein Sof, Or Elyon Pashut is Mamali Kol Matzias, there's no room for us to realize that we're there. We're there. And therefore, finite is there, and infinite is there, and Hashem's essence is there, and everybody's happy. The only problem is there's no one to be happy with, because he didn't let us know that we exist yet. So then he goes into this thing in polarities. He's like, okay, I realize I can't have these two things be here at the same time. So I'll remove the infinite, I'll leave the finite. Now we've got a problem. We've only got chetzitzura. We've only got half a form, because the infinite light he had to remove in order to let us know that we're here. So now we have the job of returning the other part of it through Torah mitzvahs, through elevation of ourselves in the world, etc. And that replaces the original light that was there, but not by way of negating us out of existence anymore, because we're holding down the fort of our existence, because it's all taking place in this light of the tzimtzum. It's all happening after the tzimtzum, which preserves our sense of self, and yet we sort of pour in light through the tzimtzum so much that it actually removes all concealments to the point that it's Adam. That's accomplished with Torah mitzvahs. How many mitzvahs are there? 613. This is the tzura of Adam, 613 parts. So in all of your parts, you'll be an Adam, or the world will be an Adam, and not a behema, like it's acting these days. So we'll have godliness in the world.
So Adam is one of the two half forms of the.
No. Aleph is half the form, and Dam is half the form. When it comes together, it's called Adam.
And that's the two half forms.
That's the perfection. Yeah. No. Yeah. 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 And the reason why it wasn't okay before Hashem already had it is because you were not a participant. Let's see if we can continue in. Yeah. Alufo shel olam, the master of the world. Okay, so after the parentheses. Al Kain, after all that, ein ba'atzmus elokus shum shinoi klal chule. One thing we've established by saying that the whole thing is only light and not shefa is that there's clearly no change in the atzmus of elokus because he didn't do anything, right? He's not on the move. He's not giving any shefa out. That's one. And two, furthermore, shegam be'inyan ha'or lo naisa shino, that even in this light, which doesn't change Hashem to begin with, but you might now start casting, aspersions on the light, that there's change happening there, because certainly it looks like a tzimtzum looks like something's taking place. He says even in there's no change in the light, in the whole sort of light show that's taking place, which is like a reality which is sort of suspended in midair, having nothing to do with Hashem putting himself into it, right? It's like it says, "Hutziva v'nivra'u." You ever heard this? We say it every day in davening. It's brought in a bunch of Maimarim. This notion of "Hutziva v'nivra'u" means he commanded and they came into be. They were created in a passive tense. Whereas sometimes they say Breshis bara Elokim, there is this notion that Hashem is a bara. He's doing something. He's creating. There is a concept of shefa, right? Within the realm of the Seder Ishtalshlus, when I'm going to give over to you, you're going to give over to him. There is a concept of shefa, and Hashem, so to speak, has that also going on. But in terms of the light and all the creations, how they got there, it says Hutziva v'nivra'u. He commanded and they were. Not that he actually put himself into them, but just snapped his fingers and boom, the whole thing is there without any effort whatsoever. So that shows on the fact that the essence is not changed. But what's furthermore, even in the light, there's no change. That even though the light seemingly went through a change because there was a tzimtzum, and not only that, but even after the light comes back after the tzimtzum, it's called a thin line. The fact that you're going to call it a thin line means it's higher on the top, lower in the middle, lower at the bottom. All that seemingly speaks to change. The tzimtzum speaks to change, and the perpetual tzimtzumim that happen in the kav only spell more change, seemingly. He says no. Right? No siflakach shetechila samshacha, so he al yidei tzimtzum. So he says first and foremost that the whole business starts with a tzimtzum, right? In other words, that despite the fact that there's many tzimtzumim in the kav, over and above the fact that there's a massive tzimtzum which removes all the light in the first place. In other words, change, and more change. Mikom makom. However, no. Ha'inyan delo shanisi hu gam ba'or. This notion that Hashem is not changed is also in the light. It's not just in the atzmus vis-a-vis the light. It's in the light itself and all these massive changes that take place. Nothing's changing. How do you know? Because not in this chapter you're not going to know. Who just showed up to the party? The Tzemach Tzedek, right? The third Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he's going to explain to us very clearly how in the light there was no change, just like in the Atzvus there was no change. And he does that in a mimer called Hamanas Elokus. Maybe we'll learn it together one day. It's one of the classics. She'inyan zeh, that this concept, that there ain't shinoi gamba, or that there's no change even in the light, Nizbar b'bir ha'otzros chaim, he explains in his explanation of the Arizal's work. And we're going to, I guess, I'm thinking by way of my feelings, we're going to get to that tomorrow. Yes. Shikoyach.
Is there other calves that are dense and long, or
No, it's just the one calf. It's just one calf.
Just one calf?
Yeah.